I thought if I was going to make a living as a writer or an illustrator, it would just happen and you would be huge. That I'd wake up one morning and I'd be Stephen King. They'd be selling millions and millions of books. Or, those of us in cartooning and illustration, we tend to have a lot of hero worship. We have our favorite artists and we just love their work. So if I can't wake up one morning and be as good as Charles Schultz or Ronald Searle or Chris Sanders, who makes things like Lilo and Stitch, I figured I can't make a living doing it. But I knew how to make a living working on the internet, doing corporate design, doing graphic design. I worked in a lot of software companies and ended up working, in video games and things. But all the while, I was filling my sketchbooks and filling my drawing books. I have stories. I still have stories I wrote 20 years ago. But, that they don't really pay bills. And then I took a night class at a school in Pasadena, taught by Marla Frazee, who's a wonderful children's book author and illustrator. And the very first hour of that class, it reminded me of everything I had forgotten in the last 20 years of my life. I think it made me realize that this was something I really loved to do. I still didn't know how I could make a living. I didn't know how you turned it into a career, but I couldn't stop doing it. And from that class forward, it was a huge focus. And it took about 5 years after that class of starting to get work out there and with Marla's support and meeting other illustrators and authors until I finally got some positive feedback in the industry. But along the way, you get all kinds of feedback. I have one agent who I submitted my work to, and they took the time to write me a letter back, and they said, "Your work does not belong in the children's lit market. You need to find something else to do." And that's really wonderful. So it took a while to find the people who responded to my work. So after not knowing exactly what to do, I ended up in graduate school at UCLA in animation, and that led to a job at Disney. And after about a year of that, I was married by now, and we were going to have a baby. And I realized there I was still looking at this wonderful world of picture books and wanting to do it. And my wife and I realized neither of us wanted to stay in LA. And that's when we moved up to Portland. And there I was trying to get into picture books, and I finally got the email that I was waiting for from an art director. And they sent a manuscript up. Very excited, my first book, but I didn't like the manuscript. And I remembered back to Marla's class, and one of the things she always said was, don't take a book if you don't like it. And I turned the book down. And I thought that was my big moment. And there I was, throwing it away. I got another email from an editor that I had met, and they had a book called The Book That Eats People. And they didn't know what to do with it, and so they offered it to me as my first book. I think they just didn't know what else to do with such a strange book. So there I got my first book. I should feel like I've made it, but I didn't. I was still learning so much. I finally had my first book, and I had to go back and try to remember, everything I'd been learning about how to do a picture book. Because in the meantime, I'd been doing all my own projects. I'd written probably a dozen different picture books. I'd drawn all kinds of stuff. But suddenly you have a professional, a real project, and the editor with a deadline, and you have to sign a contract. And I think basically it was like going back to first grade again. How am I going to do this? Working to that book made me realize a lot of my strengths and weaknesses, what I do well and what I don't. And I think for younger artists and writers, especially in kids' book, that's really important. What do you love to do and what do you do best? And with The Book That Eats People, it was a perfect fit. And those are the books I look for, or those are the books I try to write. I finished up The Book That Eats People, and within, I would say 8 months to 10 months, I sold my graphic novel Earthling, which I had worked on for a whole lot of years. And that sold and became the first project that I wrote and I would illustrate. And it's certainly different than my picture books. And it was, again, like going back to first grade. Suddenly I had a real editor, a real publisher, a full color book with a deadline, a contract I had to sign. And it was like trying to remind yourself how to do this for real. We had our baby. By that point, Lily was born, and that really changed how I looked at my profession. It better become a profession, because I no longer had time to do freelance design work or work in a corporate and do my books and have a baby. By the time that started wrapping up, I had been offered another picture book, And I was contacted by a literary agency, and they actually interviewed me. I don't know how it's supposed to work in the real world, but I submitted several stories I've written. They looked at some of the book dummies I'd been making, book dummies for 20 years. So I pulled a few out and sent them off. And to my great surprise, they signed me. And it's a great fit. My agent, Sean McCarthy, is the right agent for me. And that has made a huge difference. So when people ask me, and I get asked a lot, is having an agent important? It was really important for me to have an agent. One book followed the last book, followed the next book, and there was another book. Pretty soon I realized I was a working author and illustrator doing picture books. Suddenly I found myself drawing day in, day out, writing new manuscripts, submitting them to my agent, getting notes back from my agent, us figuring out who to submit them to, which editor might like them. And so it became a real job, a real way beyond full-time job, but it is not a 9-to-5 job. And through all my other jobs, all the writing and drawing I was doing, I didn't understand that I was already doing the job that I love. It's not quite what I thought being an author and illustrator would be, but I can't imagine doing anything else.